Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and indeed welcome back to French Fancy, my build of the 1/72 scale Curtiss Hawk from Arma Hobby. And hopefully, having seen part 1, you'll know that we're ready to start painting this little creature. There she is, exactly as you saw it last. Well, not exactly actually, because I have put a little bit of Ammo Ultra Glue just in these seams here. You can tell by the gloss there that I've done that. I'll put you over there for the minute because we're going to talk about the markings for a couple of moments. This is the scheme I'm going to do. I was halfway tempted to go with this one just because I suspect no one else will. It's quite a bit simpler paint scheme, same colours but quite a much simpler camouflage scheme. But I just don't quite like the markings as much, so this one it is. So this aircraft was the mount of Jan Zumbach, who was a Polish pilot, and he became famous later on in the war, but having left Poland, he flew with the French for a short time in both the Curtiss Hawk and the Marine 406, and then obviously ended up in Britain with the fall of France. He became one of the founding members of 303 Polish Squadron, and many of us modellers will be very familiar with the aircraft he flew during that phase and in the Battle of Britain. Later still, he ended up being the commander of 303 Squadron and went on after that and ended up later still being the commander of the 2nd Polish Air Wing. His final victory tally at the end of the war was 12 confirmed kills, 5 probables and 1 damaged. But this is where he started, and this is the scheme I'm going to do. So I'll quickly just run through the colours I'm going to use. I am no expert, nowhere near, on any of this. I've got no idea what these colours represent. So I am completely in the hands of the instructions here, but that's fine. I don't mind that. I think Arma kits are pretty well researched as a rule. So using the instructions and the various recommendations across the colour ranges there, I've come up with the following. So the underside I will paint with lacquer paint Tamiya LP37 Light Ghost Grey. Obviously this is meant for modern American aircraft, but this is going to be my underside colour. And for the top sides I will be using MRP Mr. Paint, with big thanks to Premium Hobbies who supply me with these paints. And the colours I will be using are, for the grey, MRP 115 Ocean Grey. For the green I'm going to use MRP 138 Olive Drab. This wasn't the recommendation, I've just decided to use it because I have it. And for the brown I'm using MRP 036 Red Brown, which is a German World War II AFV colour. I think the recommendation for the green colour is actually, they've put XF81 Tamiya, so they're talking RAF dark greenish, but I didn't want to use RAF dark green because I'm already using RAF Ocean Grey and I want it to look different to other things. So I'll go with these colours, I'll put them on and see what I think. If they don't look right, I'll mess about and mix and tint them, but we'll see how that goes. So that's the colours I'm going to get into. But before starting on actual colour work, there's a couple of things to do. I want to have the option to employ a little bit of chipping on this. I don't have any reference materials to hand, but I did do some googling, and it seems like these aircraft were, by the time of this model, fairly careworn, and there's quite a lot of evidence of chipping on the wings and the forward fuselage. So I want to do a little bit of chipping, but this is 72 scale, so I'll keep it real. So the first thing I'd actually need to do is spray some aluminium colour on the affected areas. So that's the forward fuselage, the leading edge of the wings, and just the walkway areas. So that's going to be the first step. In amongst around and under that, I'm also going to put some black on the canopy frames There's the separate part. Some black will go onto those, and then I'll put silver on those as well, so we can have some chipping on the canopy if we choose to. So that's the first bit, and I'll come back to you once that is done. Right, I have the silver on, here it is. I have applied it everywhere where I think I might want to do a chipping. So it covers the forward fuselage and cowl, the wing root areas, or the walkways, and the wing leading edges basically. You can see it quite happily there. That is LP11. I tend to do this, I've got one of these steel agitator balls in the jar. I tend to add a little bit of Mr. Colour Thinner ball in there, just shake it up and then just use it straight from the jar pretty much. I really like LP11 for this kind of thing, it's very, very good. On top of that, I placed a very thin coat of X22, and then that was left to dry a day or two. And as you can see, the results are quite nice. You can see that my seams are good. You can actually see where all the seams were, and you can see that you can't see the seams anymore. Even though I did not prepare the surface for a natural metal finish, the application of aluminium at this point really does serve as an excellent revealer. On top of that, and what you can't tell just by looking at it, I have put hairspray. All of the areas that you now see in aluminium were coated with hairspray. I just have a random hairspray that I bought in my local supermarket, which I can't currently see. Here it is. Here it is. My Hair Matters Firm Hold Hairspray. It's quite a large can, there's still a lot in there. This was bought on the basis that it was the cheapest one they had. Nothing more, nothing less. I don't think that it matters a jot what brand or type of hairspray you pick up. Just add its hairspray. So that was, I always decant it into the airbrush. I don't spray it directly out of the can. It's much too heavy a layer if you spray it straight out of the can, and you do run the risk of affecting the underlying paints because it is solvent based. I decant it into the airbrush the dangerous way by basically simply straight into the cup. Always aim it at a friend, keep your eyes out of the way, and it'll be fine. Of course you can decant it with a little more decorum if you choose to rig up a straw and everything else, but that's how I do it. That was put on there, and that has also been left to dry. So the first thing, the next part then, is I'm going to spray the black walkways. Yes, that's right, I'm going to spray the black walkways first, and this is a really good example of why it's good to have a plan when you're doing things like this. If you want to produce nice chipping and a good weathered paint job, it's really important to have your head around the layers and the order of things before you start. Ordinarily, I think we can all agree that you'd probably paint the walkways pretty much last on a model like this. And to be fair, I could still paint them last if I masked that area, but the thinking behind this is that if I spray the model and then put the black walkways on and then try to chip it, I've got to work my way through all those other bits and pieces of paint, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to put black on first, and I'm going to chip it, and then I'm going to mask over that black, and then I'll move on to the underside because I'm going to work lightest to darkest because that is my preference. You don't necessarily have to these days, model paints are quite opaque, but I'm going to. So black first, good old XF85, I'll slap that on and get to chipping it. Moving on a touch then, I have painted the wingwork areas in black, and then I did chip them with this result. So that's that. This will be masked off obviously when I start to put the camouflage on. The chipping's just done with water. I used XF85 for the walkways themselves, then just ordinary tap water and my special chipping brush, which I made simply by getting a cheap nylon bristle brush and cutting it down, which has the effect of making it a bit sharper and a bit stiffer. I use this for chipping. I just get it wet and then scrub the surface until I start to see it to move, and then I'll sort of stab it, and, you know, just manipulate things to get the paint to wear off in a vaguely pleasing pattern. And sometimes too much comes off, and sometimes not enough comes off. It's a gloriously inconsistent process, frankly, but it works by the dissolution of the hairspray layer. So the hairspray is very, very water-based. Those of you that may have used hairspray in the past, let's say, or may even still use it, you can make this, you can create this fabulous hairstyle, and then when you go out and it rains, it all falls apart because the hairspray is designed to come off in water. So the idea here is you put that layer of hairspray down, spray your paint on top of it, and the water on your paintbrush will permeate your paint layer, and yes it will, and when it hits the hairspray will dissolve, allowing that paint layer to flake off. Essentially, this is how it works. So with acrylic type paints, it can come off very, very easily, especially if you do it straight after you've painted it, because this acrylic paints will allow the water through very, very easily. With lacquer based paints, it will still work, but it will also be a lot more difficult to make it start to chip. And there are various ways and means of adjusting the process. Essentially with lacquer paints, it's more ideal if you can chip it immediately, pretty much after you've painted it, whereas with acrylics it's sometimes better to leave it for a little while. And even the difference immediately after painting between being dry and 20 minutes later can make a big difference in how the chipping looks. So it's one of those techniques that on the face of it is quite simple, but to master it, to be able to make it behave the way you want, will take some practice, some experimentation, and there are going to be times when it doesn't work out the way you want it to. On this occasion I had a few areas where the chipping was a bit more extreme than I wanted. I did want a lot of bare metal showing here, but some of it just looked a bit too blocky. This is only a tiny scale model, so big chunky chips just aren't appropriate. They don't look right. So all I do when that happens is I take my paint and a pointed paintbrush, which in this case was this one. The paint's very thin because this is thinned down, ready for the airbrush, even though it's in its original jar. And I just take a tiny bit of paint out of the lid and just essentially reverse chip the chipped area with colour. And just link in a few areas and tidy in a few edges up, and there's my result, which I am quite happy with. Moving further forward then, ta-da, I've also painted the underside, and here we see camouflage in action, don't we? Where's the plane gone? So I've used LP37 as advertised, light ghost grey tamiya lacquer paint, laid down a nice smooth coat of colour, which was in fact 2 coats. Let that dry, and then I've gone back in and I've broken out the professional airbrush, the Iwata Custom Micron Pro CMC Plus, which is a 0.18 needle if I remember correctly. It's capable of very, very fine work, which in this scale is necessary. And so on that base layer of LP37, that's there to give coverage and to give density to the colour. That's already in. Then I take my LP37 and I mix in the airbrush, directly in the airbrush, a little bit of LP5. I'm keeping it lacquer, black. Just a little bit, just enough to darken that LP37 up, and you can see dark areas such as the beginnings of exhaust beaten areas, dirty patches after the wheels, panel lines, etc. How you apply it is entirely up to you and the effect that you are trying to achieve. I haven't just done the panel lines, I've also sort of mottled, blotched and even spatter painted areas, so I've got little dark bits all over the place, so I think it is relatively easy to see. Throw away whatever paint is left, clean the airbrush. I then take my LP37 again, and this time mix it with LP4, which is flat white. to provide a lighter shade, and a much lighter shade at that. My experience of this method is that the lighter tones tend to blend away much more easily than the darker ones, so I compensate for that by pulling the lighter tone up a couple of steps. So the dark tone generally when I do this is not too far removed from the original colour, but the lighter tone is a lot lighter, and that's given me this result. And again, I haven't just counter shaded, I haven't just hit the high points with the light shade, I haven't avoided the panel lines, I have done mottling, blotching, and you can also see that it doesn't match from one side to the other. I've got light patches on this side that I don't have on this side, and vice versa. It's deliberately, or at least trying to be, a little bit random, and that's the finished result. Now, there's a lot of good reasons for doing it this way. It's much more versatile than pre-shading. Because I've already got the colour in place underneath this shading, I don't have to worry about my finished result not being the right colour. I could have pre-shaded the plastic with dark and light colours and then laid the LP37 over the top, but the problem with that is that often, not always, but often, by the time you've got your coverage, colour coverage, you've lost most of the pre-shading, as you'd expect by the very meaning of the word coverage. That's why I do it this way. I've already got my colour locked in, I've added shading. Now all I need to do is take my LP37 again, get a nice thin mix in the brush and blend coats across this until I'm happy with the level of the shading that's still visible. There's a few factors that affect this. Obviously, the further away from centre you go with your light and dark, the more blending it's going to take to make it look good. And conversely, the closer you are to the original hue, the less blending it will need, if any. Sometimes you can just not even bother blending, and this is relatively close to that in fact. But the advantage as well with blending, apart from just unifying the finish a little bit, you can end up with a little bit of roughness doing this because you're just wafting bits of colour all over the place, so you get a bit of overspray. This isn't too bad, but the blend coat will also unify the surface in smoothness terms as well as in colour terms. So I've showed the belly. I haven't showed me doing it, it's just airbrushing, but I've showed this part rather than going step by step because I think you can very clearly see what I'm trying to explain here. You can see the dark, the light areas, the mottling, the patchiness. You might even be able to see the sort of speckling here and there. I do the speckling by turning the air pressure way down with the MAC valve. If you turn it down enough, the paint will just come out in spots, and you can use that to add sprinkles and dots wherever you want. The unifying coat again is just ordinary airbrushing, and I'm going to utilise this technique for each of the upcoming 3 colours. And I say that in that pausey way because yes, it does take a lot of time. At this scale, one does need to be fairly adept in the use of the airbrush to pull this off. Doing freehand camo at all at this scale isn't particularly easy, but when you add this kind of shading options into the mix as well, and obviously on the underside there's no worries, I can just spray wherever, but once I'm doing the patches of colour on the top and where the demarcation is with the underside, it's much more difficult. I'm not bigging myself up, I'm just being honest about it. So I'm going to blend this, leave it to dry for a while, and then I'll start in on the upper surface colours, and I'm literally just going to check in from time to time during that process because I don't want the video to end up being 2 hours long just because I'm showing you the same process 4 times over. There's no need. I think that's fair. Okay, well, I'll get on with that and I'll see you on the next bit. You join me sometime later, a lot of time later. So just a moment ago in terms of the video I said this will take a while, and this represents actually work across 3 days to spray this camouflage pattern on. I think In terms of hours, it's probably somewhere around 12 hours work, which is might seem excessive, I don't know, because I don't know how long anyone else takes to do this, but it's quite difficult to do in this scale. You do need to take your time, and there is a little bit of back and forth. So I have previously made comments along the lines of touch-ups shouldn't be required when talking about masking, because I feel like it's become a modelling norm that one should expect to have to do touch-ups after a masking job, and I refute that. You should not expect to have to do touch-ups after a masking job. You should simply expect to mask it properly the first time. But with freehand camo, going backwards and forwards is part of the deal, unfortunately, especially when it's more than two colours like this, because you get your first colour in, you put your second colour in, and then you get the third colour all over the first colour trying to put it in, and so you will have to go backwards and forwards a little bit and tidy edges up here and there, I would imagine. I certainly do. So here's what it looks like then. This has had the ubiquitous X22 two coats already, and it's been set aside to dry, so that I'm leaving it to dry right now. It's had overnight already, about 12 hours. Yeah, here it is. That is one mental camouflage scheme, and that is all freehand. There was no masking here whatsoever, apart from a little bit underneath the tailplanes, obviously to stop overspray going onto the tailplane while painting these areas, and of course to mask the roots. But other than that, this is absolutely freehand everywhere, and as you can see, has been shaded and treated as I've gone along, as I said I would. There are a couple of changes from what I advertised. The grey is indeed this ocean grey MRP 115. The brown did not end up being MRP 036. When I put this on, I wasn't happy with the colour. It looked too red. So the brown is actually Mr. Hobby Aqueous. This is the Guns Acrylic H406, which is German tank World War II chocolate brown. Ludicrously, it does say it's matte on here, and it absolutely is not. So that was the brown in the end, and the green, I started out, I sprayed some of this olive drab on, and I wasn't happy with it either. I felt it looked too pale, so I darkened it with, where's it gone? Here it is, hiding behind the airbrush stand. I darkened it with some SMS RF dark green, which I believe is, broadly speaking, much too dark to represent RAF dark green. To darken it up some. It's still not really right. According to colour photographs of restored warbirds, it's not a blue enough sort of green, but it'll do. I think in retrospect that something along the lines of this might be closer. This is 34092 USAF green, something with a bit more of a blue cast to it, but that is according to the restored warbirds, although they are fairly well researched ones. Anyway, this is where I'm at. It took a long time, it was tricky, it was difficult, but I'm quite happy with how it looks, and it just is, it's just a bonkers colour scheme. And my adaptation of the artwork, as it's representative rather than exact, because in places, you know, you go off down a track and then you're like, oh, I can't really be bothered to change it now. So you end up with what you get. So that's that. But I decided to just talk a little bit about how to do this. With my current video setup, it's difficult for me to actually demonstrate this kind of stuff, because where the camera is and where it points to, I have to work quite far away from myself to be under the camera. When I set the new bench up, I'm going to ensure that I can have the camera in a better position above the bench, looking more down, so that I can work where I normally do, which is back here. You can only just see the ends of my fingers, because that allows me to If you imagine this is the edge of the bench, I essentially rest my wrists on the edge of the bench to allow steady hands, and I can't do that when I have to work all the way over here. And I also can't see properly because, again, I'm too far from myself. Anyway, I digress as usual. A better camera position and setup will be sought, which will allow me to demonstrate this kind of thing a bit more easily. But for now, I'm just going to demonstrate some of the sort of the basics of what is being honest, some fairly advanced airbrushing. So, what do we need to do this? Well, the colour. I find that lacquers are easier to use when you're trying to build a fine unmasked edge. They just are. I think that's mostly to do with particle size. They are finer, the paint is finer. I could be wrong on that, that's just my theory. But in reality, as you can see here, you can do it with the likes of Mr. Hobby. I find that Tamiya acrylic, I can't quite get as fine an edge with this as I can with Mr. Hobby, and I don't even bother trying to do it with water-based acrylics. Again, you can get an airbrush demarcation with them. It is much more difficult, and you do have to constantly fettle the airbrush as you go. What else you need? Some Mr. Colour thinner and a cotton bud. Yeah, really. A little bit of Trizact is usually a good idea. And an airbrush. So I have used this one. I think I already showed this in the video. This is my Iwata Custom Micron Plus, so it's a CMC Plus. This is unashamedly a top of the range airbrush. I don't even know how much these are now, but they're a lot. The needle size is 0.18, which is very small, and it does enable you to do some very fine work. But they are not as easy to use as the more basic airbrushes, like the Revolution, the Daily Driver. These are more tricksy, they are a little bit more finicky, they are a little bit more difficult to set up, and in use you do have to constantly fiddle about with them. So I have in here some paint. This is the same green paint that I used on the model. And I'm going to do a little bit of spraying for you. So if you're using something like MRP, this is ready to spray from the bottle. You mix it up thoroughly in the bottle and you can tip it straight in your airbrush and spray it on your model. And most of the time the viscosity and the mix that is in here is absolutely adequate for pretty much anything you're going to do. For work as fine as what I've done on this model, because of the small scale of it, the size of it, I do thin this paint, and I use Mr. Colour thinner. Not levelling thinner, just normal. I never use levelling thinner. Thinner ratio, I don't know, 20 to 30%. I never measure my mixtures. That probably frustrates some of you. But I just do it until it's right, and I don't measure it. And I think, possibly from a standpoint of being somebody who can do it, and I appreciate that could come across as arrogant, but trust me, I don't mean it that way. I feel like it's better to learn what you need than to learn mixtures. And the reason for that is I could say to you, you need 30% thinners. And that might work for this particular paint, this particular colour of this particular paint range, but it probably won't work for this colour, because every colour is different. Some cover better than others, some have slightly different makeups. Basically, your air pressure and your paint viscosity is going to vary infinitely. It depends on the colour, it depends on the type of paint, it depends on what you're trying to do with it, and it depends what airbrush you're using. So you need to be able to learn to recognise how to make it right to do what you need to do. And I don't believe that sitting here saying you need to spray it at 23.6 psi with the needle stop wound out one turn and 32% thinners, that doesn't help you because you're just being formulaic. It's like following a recipe to cook your dinner. You can follow the recipe, but then you need to be able to do it on your own. So I just, over time, I've just learned what I need to get what I want, which is why I don't measure anything. That was a weighty explanation, wasn't it? I apologise. So anyway, the airbrush. It's got a very fine needle, it's very finely machined. Mine is slightly damaged, which makes it harder still. I damaged the needle a little bit recently, I've bent the end a bit, and I've straightened it, but it needs machining properly, or I need to replace it. But the cost of replacement parts for these things is fairly prohibitive these days. Yeah, very fine needle, and you can see I've got the cap on. So the first thing you want to do, to be honest, is take this off. And put it to one side, somewhere where you're not going to lose it. Use your little Temu parts box, for example. You can get a finer sprayed line if you spray like this. The danger here is that it's very, very, very easy to damage the end of the needle. These are quite fragile, and you can damage it easily, or you can damage yourself with it. I have stabbed myself with this multiple times. You can also damage the model with it, because obviously it will scratch the model quite happily, and yes, you do need to get that close. So take the end off. The reason for the cotton bud and the Mr. Colour thinner, which this is for cleaning the needle. So you dampen the end of your cotton bud with a little bit of the thinners, and then you can use it, as you can see I have done, to clean the paint build up off the needle. Now, lacquer paint won't build up on the needle in the same way that acrylic will. You don't tend to get a big sort of chunk of paint on the tip, but it will build up, and when you're working again to the level of finesse that you are to do something like this, after a few minutes of painting you will notice that you're struggling to strike up a nice edge, and most of the time it's because you just need to take the paint build-up off the needle. The other 10% of the time it will be because you need to stir the paint again, because this does take a lot of time, and over time the paint will settle out in the cup. I've got paint on my finger, and you'll end up with a slightly thicker version of the paint in the bottom of the cup here. So just use the blowback method, or give it a good old mix around and a good blat straight through, just to get everything back to the way it was when you started. Okay, I have a sacrificial panel here. This is one of my spare Airscale Defiant wing panels. Just charge the compressor up. This was replaced because of some print defects, so Peter sent me a fresh one. And I'll put the I'll put the air cap back on just for a second. We know the needle's clean, and I'll try and draw a line for you. Here we go. Now you might look at that and say, well, that isn't even that fine. And it's not. I'll take that off. Go back to the same baseline, just give the needle a little bit of a clean. Doesn't really need it. And I'm going to draw another line next to it. Something wrong with my compressor, it keeps kicking in and out like a weirdo instead of just being smooth. There we go, look at the difference. Just from taking that forward air cap off, the difference in the amount of spray that you can get to come out. So the way you vary it is by needle pull. Now I'm going to deliberately be gash now. If you pull the needle back a lot with the paint this thin, you'll quickly end up getting this happen. And once that happens, it's surprisingly difficult to cover it back up again with colour actually, so you do need to try to avoid that. So you're really only pulling the needle back just enough to get the paint to flow, which is not a lot, and you have to have the airbrush insanely close. The tip of this needle is probably about 5mm from the surface, and once you get used to it, this airbrush with the right paint mix and a bit of patience, you can pretty much do a pin wash with it. And that's the method. So you draw your line, come over here, draw a line, and once you've set your line, just start to fill it in. And I always angle the airbrush away from the edge that you want sharp. So once you've set your demarcation in place, you can just colour it in. Thus, and just work away from the edge that you've put in. You can see how fine that is able to be. And the Trizac you can use just to finesse the edge of your work just a little bit more. The amount of paint that goes onto the surface when you do this is minuscule. That paint layer is microns deep, and thus, because of that, if you want to, if you tickle the edge with a bit of Trizac, you can reduce that feathered out effect and overspray even more. And to facilitate that, one way that you can add a sort of a safety net with something like this is to use clear coats or intercoats in between your colours. So you lay your first colour down, put a single thin coat of clear in there, one that matches what you're painting, obviously. X22 is fine, and that gives you just a tiny bit of safety depth there. So if you make a splat like this, or you get an edge it's a bit loose, or you get some spotting off the edge, which is very common, it just gives you that little tiny bit of depth that you can sand to without affecting the colour underneath it. And you can seal each colour in layer by layer as you put them down, just for that little bit of, like I say, a safety net. It adds steps, it adds time to the process because you then need to let it dry obviously, but it gives you that little buffer for mistakes to be made and to be a little more easy to clean up basically. But anyway, there you go. So the line size is varied by paint flow and distance and speed. The more you pull the needle back, the more paint you're going to get. You're also going to get a wider line. If you need the line to be thinner, you need to come in closer and you need to be putting less paint on, and you need to be prepared to move fast, because when the paint, as I say, is this thin, it'll want to spider quite quickly, so you need to be able to be positive. So sort of pre-plan your route, you know, that's just pre-plan your route and just be positive, be confident, and you can, with practice, get results like that. I'm quite happy with that. So the next part of the puzzle is going to be adding the party markings. Multicoloured French Air Force party plane. There we go. I am going to make masks for the underwing serials. U007. I'm going to make masks for them. There's nothing wrong with these decals, I'm sure, but they're very large and they have carrier film right across them, and they're going across all this. This detail here isn't such a big problem, but these potentially are, these little stubs. I don't know if these are, I don't actually know what these are. I don't think they're rocket mounts or something, I don't know, but I think these are dive brakes, but I don't know what those are. Either way, you trim those off on the other versions, but not this one. But those are right smack bang across the U and the 7. So getting the decal to work on there is going to be difficult. Not impossible, but do you know what? No, I'll use them. Scrap that. Scrap all of that. I was initially going to go for the version as shown in this main illustration with the fuselage roundels, but I've reneged on that. I've decided to go for this earlier option, which has got the large bird on the side instead. I have no clear idea what type of bird that is meant to represent, but the decal sheet does include 2 large versions. There are the small ones, which will go on in place of the fuselage roundels, and I've decided to use that option. So I'm going to crack on and start putting those on and see how they go. Here we are with all the decals on then, and that went pretty easily, to be fair. So the underside, I did toy with the idea of making up some masks using these decals as a guide, because of the raised detail which abounds where the U and the 7 reside. This, I think, is this an air brake, I assume here? This isn't really a problem, but these posts, whatever these are, mountings for something, I assume. Obviously the decal can't really conform to those, so I just cut slits with a knife. I basically, when I applied the decal, I cut, first and foremost then, let's get this in order, I separated these because these were one large decal, so I trimmed around each one to make them separate, and this one, in both of these zeros, are just applied without any issues. This minor bit of raised detail, no issue, got the decal around that without any problem. And then the 7 and the U, I applied this end of the decal first and pressed it all the way down so that it was fairly solidly attached, and then worked my way this way, got it down across this detail here, and then slit, used the scalpel and just slit the decal to allow it to push down over these details, and then finished the job with the decal solutions. And I will just touch in the areas that aren't covered by decal now. I'll touch in with a fine paintbrush and a little bit of black paint, no issues there. And as you can see, those have just gone down so well, absolutely beautiful. The rest of the decals, so these are, I guess you could call them single layer because it's black. The thickness of these is minimal, as you can just see. The rest of them though are multiple layers of colour. To get the colour density, there has to be a white underneath this. So these are a bit thicker and consequently take a little bit more effort to get down nice and tight. They're the kind of decals that sort of, they look a little bit like they've not gone down all that well whilst they're wet, but once they dry out, as you can see, they're doing the job just fine. They are just a tad thicker, but not thick enough to be an issue by any means. Same deal everywhere else, effectively just added them where directed. No issues, no problems, everything, they've all gone on really nicely. I did use all of the stencils, but they're beautiful. They're so tiny, they've just disappeared into the finish, so that for once the stencils enhance the finish rather than detracting from it, which is nice. And another, as a side note on the stencils, the kit does provide twice as many stencils as you need. So if you do mess them up or lose them or turn them inside out or anything like that, there's a spare one. And I'm going to keep these because all of these stencils are silver backed placard style, so they can get used as placards on other things, and I do still need the propeller stencils, which are here. That leaves the rudder decal. Now again, as you can see, this has gone down just fine, both sides. I've lost a bit of decal over the trim tab horn here, but I need to touch in along the back edge anyway. So a lot of times with this type of decal, they're a tiny bit oversized, and you can kind of, using your solution, soften the decal and wrap it around the edges to give you colour everywhere. This one, no, it's not. It just about wraps around down the trailing edge and along the top here, just about. But underneath there was a big gap, and up the leading edge there was no coverage at all. So it is necessary to mix a blue paint to colour in all the way down this leading edge and the entirety of this lower area here. And I also used some white to fill in this central band. I have not yet touched up the red, but I will. I used a little bit of white on the top just to neaten it all up. So the white I used was the new MRP acrylic, which is just fine. You shake it up, pull a little drop out onto a palette or just on the work mat here. Brush what you need to brush. That went on beautifully. I unfortunately don't have any colours I could use for the blue and the red currently in that range, so I had to mix the blue, and for that I got a little bit lucky, I think. I was just kind of staring blankly at my paint max, as I sometimes do, and I noticed this and thought, this is Mr. Colour 392, so this is the lacquer Mr. Hobby paint, or guns, Mr. Colour 392, which is interior blue brackets Soviet. There you go. And that is very almost the right colour straight from the bottle. It's definitely in the right part of the colour diagram. So I got a little bit of this on a palette, and I mixed in a touch, and I mean it was only a touch, of Tamiya XF8 flat blue. Just a touch, I mean literally a bit on a brush, just a little bit at a time, mixed it in, added a little bit of thinners because this is quite thick from the jar, and brush painted that onto my rudder, and it's basically spot on. It's so close to identical that it doesn't matter. I can see the colour difference if you look very, very carefully. Sort of just in here there's a slice in the decal, which doesn't actually need to be there where the hinge is. I can see a little bit of a difference there, but it's really minimal, and that's absolutely fine. And it looks, when fitted, get in there, there you go. It looks absolutely spectacular. It's quite the party plane, this one. So I'm going to get a little bit of Trizact out. I need to replenish my water vessel at the side here, and I'm going to very, very lightly give the whole surface a rub, because the next thing I need to do is add the flat coat. I want this model to be a little bit less satin than usual. I want it to be a bit more matte than a lot of my work. If you look at reference photos of these aircraft, some of them are got quite a nice sheen to them, and other ones look very, very well worn. So I'm going to go more towards the well worn end of things. So I want a slightly more dull mixture than usual. So I'm going to take my premix, which is actually satin, and I'm going to mix it with some matte, which is very, very matte. If you've ever used this, it sucks the life out of absolutely everything. So I'm going to mix these two together to make what should be a pretty matte-ish matte coat, and spray that on. And I might come back, and whilst I'm painting that, and talk a little bit about painting VMS onto things. VMS then, okay, I know I've said this in other videos, but I guess I really need to say it in every single video, to be fair. VMS flat varnish comes in satin and matte flavours as standard. it's worth realising that the satin, the nominal satin VMS flat coat, is actually what most people would regard as flat or matte. The matte is very matte. Okay, so my satin is actually a mixture. Now if I get my big satin, it's difficult to show, but the viscosity of this stuff, I think if I tip that, do you see? It's broadly reminiscent of wallpaper paste, if anyone remembers that stuff. Does that even still exist? It's really thick. It's very heavy bodied stuff. And as a result, it can be a little bit awkward to spray. So there's a few ways of dealing with that. One way is to use a lot of pressure, which is a thing. You do need to use a bit of pressure with VMS. Another is to use an airbrush with a larger needle setup, which will allow it to flow the heavier bodied paint. What I've done is a little bit of all of that. My satin is actually a mixture of satin and gloss. The gloss, if I tip it up, you can immediately see is significantly less viscous. I don't know if it really shows. It's quite a bit thinner. So my satin has got a little bit of gloss in it, and it's also got a little bit of the proprietary airbrush thinners in it as well, all of which has brought it down to a really quite manageable viscosity. My 0.5 revolution can handle this quite happily, and it hasn't altered the properties of the clear coat. So the thing with the properties, I talk about properties as if everyone knows what I'm on about. Previously, all the flat coats I've ever used have had the same effect, which is that they will tend to dull off your colours. There's a sort of a greying effect that they have, so they sap the life out of your colours as well as your finish. This can be particularly problematic on dark colours, which this mostly is, and especially on black. The closest I came to a reasonable flat coat before VMS, I don't know if I've even got it, I may have binned it now, was the Winsor and Newton Galleria flat coat, which is designed for paintings. That works pretty well. And Guns H20, I think it is, the acrylic flat is reasonable as well. But I was mostly using the Galleria flat coat before I started to use VMS. So when people started talking about VMS, particularly when Jamie Hago started talking about VMS, because we had conversations in the past about how flat coats always make everything look grey, this doesn't do that. If anything, this does what any other clear coat does, and will actually darken and crispen your colours and your finish to an extent. And that's why, even though it's a pain in the bum to put on at times, this is why I use it, and that's why it's so popular. So anyway, this flat, you can actually see just how thick that is. I've shaken up and mixed that, then I've mixed it with a little bit of this to give me what you see in here, which is still quite thick, but I've test sprayed the underside of my tail planes, and it's exactly the sort of finish I wanted. Flat but not completely dead, and it's sprayed fairly easy. So I'm now going to show you how to lay it on as best I can. It's going to make a lot of noise, for which I will apologise now, because I have to have the pressure ramped up a little bit. I mixed it in this spare X22 jar just so that I've definitely got enough, so if I need to do touch-ups and things later, I've got some more of the same finish. I'll empty it out of there and throw it away when the model's finished though. Okay, so I'll just do this wing panel with you looking as best I can. Airbrush then, the 0.5 revolution, it's in there as you saw it straight out of here. I also have a cotton bud, and again it's got the Mr. Colour thinners on it, because again you need something like this to hand to clean the needle. You have to clean the needle a lot. So you need to use, I'll try and get it in the light so you can see what's happening. You need to use a wet coat. That doesn't mean a heavy coat. Please don't misunderstand. Wet coat and heavy coat are two different things. It needs to be wet. If you spray it on dry, it will dry. The texture that you put on it is what you're going to get back out of it. And this is where the trickiness lies, because it's such a heavy bodied fluid. To get a wet coat, it's difficult for it not to also be a heavy coat, and trust me, it will probably look pants when you initially spray it on, and that's because of the reflective and magnifying properties of water, the thickness of the paint layer. Anyway, I digress. Let's put some paint on this. I can't see what I'm doing, so hopefully it'll be okay. Here we go. Wasn't quite wet enough through the middle of that wing, so I just put a bit more back on before it got dry. But you can see, you see how gritty and nasty it looks. It won't do when it's dry, I promise. But that is a wet coat, but it also isn't a heavy coat, and it's quite easy to see by direct comparison right now. It has not dulled and greyed and washed out and made foggy the colours. Quite the opposite. It almost looks a little bit more vivid, and this is why we like VMS. So in terms of drying, you can see it is starting to dry off already. It will dry to the touch quite fast, but it takes quite a little while to dry through properly before you can really fully carry on with other operations on the model. So do bear that in mind. It's one of those things, it's useful to do it at the end of a modelling session so you can go off and do other chores, go about your day or go to bed and leave it to dry. This was sprayed probably 15-20 minutes ago here, and it's dry, but I wouldn't be wanting to put washes and things on it yet. So I'm going to do the rest off camera because it's just much easier for me to do that, and I'll come back to you later. And here's an example of what I mean by the tip build up. I'll try and get that to be in focus. Do you see all that on the needle? You'll know that's happening because your airbrush is suddenly going to start spraying paint in all sorts of directions and just being generally nasty. So that's when you just whip the end off the airbrush. Use your cotton bud like so. There you can see a big chunk. Get rid of that. So nice and clean and ready for action again, and then carry on. Luckily, thankfully, even the clear is very resistant to overspray type effects, so it's not really a big problem to have to stop midway through a panel like that to clean the airbrush. But it's one of those things, if you pre-plan as you're going along, it's not really a big issue on such a small model as this, but on a larger model, what I would suggest is that you would maybe paint the top of the wing and one side of the fuselage, and then come to the side and just clean your airbrush off, and then carry on, do the bottom of the wing and so on. Just plan your needle cleans into it rather than waiting for it to start playing up, is what I'm saying. And here's the result. I'm absolutely chuffed with that. It's exactly what I wanted. It's nice and flat, but it's not lifeless. It's just a little hint of a sheen there. And obviously I couldn't wait to demask the windows, because it just looks so much more like a model without the masking on the windows, doesn't it? Very, very pleased with the finish. So for those of you that are sitting there shaking your heads sadly into your coffee cups, yeah, I know I haven't done a wash yet. I'm going to do the wash. What I'm going to do with washing, I'm going to do over the flat coat. I think I don't want a panel line wash. I'm happy with how visible the panel lines already are because of the way it was painted. But there'll be some washing, but it's going to be a little bit more akin to a filter, if you've heard of those. Or I feel like no one really talks about filters anymore, but I want to just give potentially a little bit of a worn and dusty appearance almost. And I'm going to use a lighter sort of It's not going to be a full-on wash because I don't want it to soak into the panel lines and make them light, but I'm going to use some filtering techniques to do that, but not yet because I need this VMS clear to have a good bit of time to really dry before I start putting wash type stuff on it. So in the meantime, I do have the small parts here which all need to be painted up. Mostly undercarriage and wheel stuff in here. I have all the undercarriage doors on these sticks where I painted the external colour. These all need to be painted with the internal colour, washed, weathered, matted down, all that good stuff. I've got the propeller to do, that is ready to paint, and then the sliding portion of the canopy. Now that the other masking is off, I can offer that up, mark it up, and I need to spray a little bit of brown camo colour onto this, and then this will also need to be flat coated. So I've got bits and pieces to be doing whilst I'm allowing this flat coat a good little while to dry. I don't want to hit it with wash until at least this evening, or probably actually tomorrow. So I will busy myself with these small parts in the meantime. Well, here I am done with washes, and again I've not demoed it, but I'll just talk you through what I have done. Pretty much exactly what I said I was going to do. And it's possibly relatively difficult to tell the difference, but that's potentially quite deliberate. So I have used Tamiya Panel Line Accent Color. Now these are proper enamel washes, and they're brilliant. They seem to be able to separate in the jars and then mix back up again without any trouble at all. Say no more about that. So I used them as filters on this occasion. So let's look at the underside first. This is a pale blue-grey colour, and I used the grey. This is the standard grey. I think I've got every single colour here actually. I've got grey, light grey, dark brown, brown and black. I think that is all the colours. And to my UK viewers, I am terribly sorry. These are a little bit awkward and, well, more expensive than awkward. They're quite expensive to buy here because they're not just available everywhere like everything else Tamiya is, but they are worth seeking out and paying over the odds for, frankly. So yes, I used the grey, which is this colour. It is a very similar colour to the underside, I think you'll agree, and I used it as a filter like I said I would. And what it's done is it's pulled everything together, so now the decals really have become part of the paint scheme to my eyes. So it's toned down the brightness of the red, white and blue, and it's brought up the black a little bit. It's kind of blended all the other stuff together. I mean, it's just worked, and I'll show you on, I'll just do a little bit on, I don't know, there's actually 2 coats already on the elevators, but it won't matter if I put another coat. So all you do, you can use this straight out of the bottle. It's got a handy paintbrush, and it's actually fine enough to be somewhat useful. Paint it. Now because I'm putting this over the flat, it paints on very happily indeed, as you can see. And it sort of soaks into that surface finish, and that's literally it. Let it dry. So what you can do as it's drying, what you'll find is that where you've got panel lines and things, it sort of comes out of the panel lines and it makes streaks and things happen in your nice smooth coat. So I get a big, this is a big brush, so number 5, and as you can see it's been used for this kind of thing a fair bit, but it's dry, nothing on it. You can use it to just effectively just blend it a little bit, keeping things moving so that you don't get watermarks, tide marks, just marks frankly, and just blend it until you get to the point like it is now where it's pretty much dry, and then leave it to dry, and that's it. That's all I did. And as I say, it's just tied that finish together really nicely. On top of that then, or alongside that I've used the standard brown shade on the canvas areas and the actual undercarriage bays. Let that dry, gave it a tickle with a cotton bud, and then I used the dark brown shade just to pick out the details in those wheel bays. And that's done a really nice job of enlivening that finish and making it look less one-dimensional. I've picked out the exhausts with a little bit of Mr. Metal Colour Stainless. Brilliant stuff. Just brush painted that on, and there is some Tamiya black wash on that as well. That will be further improved by, I'm going to paint a little bit of flat black into the inside, and I'm going to come in with the grime mixture in the airbrush in a while and just kind of dot it about the place. I've then engaged in some streaking activities. You know when you realise what you're saying halfway through saying it. So using a cotton bud to clean these out made the cotton bud a little bit dirty, and I used that just to drag back a bit of staining. Just, you can see it here, here and back here. And then I've done streaking using black, dark brown and just a touch of the Arma Hobby fresh engine oil stuff, emanating mostly sort of up here in between the exhausts. Just a little bit of dirtiness, a little touch of streaking. I've kept it quite subtle. It is a very small model, it's a small scale, and big obvious streaks are not really the order of business unless you want to depict something that's got a horrible oil leak, really. So I'll bring that up so you can see what I've done. It's quite subtle. From a distance it just looks dirty, but when you look very closely and inspect it, you can see evidence of streaks and lines and marks in there. Slight differences in tone and depth of said streaks. And that's what I've done on the underside. I used the dark grey wash, it's this colour, to mark out control surfaces and some of the removable panels, and I've used an AK chrome pen, felt tip pen thing in the ident light down there. I shall pop the lens into that shortly. And I did exactly the same thing on the upper surface, exactly the same thing. I used the same grey panel line colour as a filter, and again it's just pulled everything together. I think it's brought the markings down a tad. They're still bright, but they just look like part of the finish now. I've done that across the whole thing, and again I used a darker colour, this time dark brown, around the panel lines in the cowling and the removable panels and the control surfaces. And that's it. That's all I've done. It's taken a couple, 3 hours, just going backwards and forwards, messing about, little bits of wash here, little bits of wash there, letting it dry. And that is the beauty really of using these enamel washes, especially over a flat coat, is that they do stick. You know, I can put a layer down, and once it's dry, you really have to work quite hard at it to get it off again. So you can build layers of effects if you wish, but I'm quite happy with this. If I give you a close-up, you can kind of see around the wing root how the extreme differences in tone, where the chipping and the walkway and everything are. The filter just evens everything out a little bit, makes it look a bit less like an illustration and a bit more like a thing. You can see my chipping, maybe, if you look very close, it's very tiny. Again, big chips wouldn't look right on a model this size, but it's all around the cowl, the nose area, little tiny chips. The guns, the leading edge of the cowl and the leading edge of the wings. There's enough there to make it look used, essentially. But I'm quite happy with how that's looking, so I'm content to call that it for the wash. Canopy, I have put the brown on and flat coated it, demasked it, so that can be fitted now. And you can see over here I've got wheels and tyres, undercarriage pieces. The rest of the parts are in my little box, and I've painted and flat coated the aerial. The only real major bit of work to do now is catch up with the propeller. This has got a coat of hairspray across its entirety. I'm going to spray the centre of it with LP5, the lacquer paint satin black, and the blades with XF85. Then that'll need a little bit of chipping work, decaling, and then flat coating. So bit of work to do on the propeller, but other than that, I'm ready to pop this all together now. I will do a little bit more on the tyres as well, just dull them down a bit more. So final assembly beckons. Hopefully it will all go to plan and I won't have too much mischievery from this little model, but if I do, I will report back and let you know. Here you go then, here is the little hawk all done. So I'll just stroll through the steps with you, and it's quite hard to move it now because of all the aerials and things that stick out. So let's grab hold of you. There we go, that's better. Underneath then, tail wheel added, and the tail wheel doors. We have a retracting tail wheel complete with doors on this little thing, all added at the back there. Undercarriage legs and doors etc. added at the front, and all of this, the locations for a lot of this are vague, would be too strong. They aren't vague, but they also aren't particularly positive. The legs themselves locate beautifully in the wings, but all of the doors are a little bit sort of, they do slot into place and it's obvious where they're supposed to go, but they don't sort of click in. You have to use, you know, glue and feel for it, but everything goes together very nicely. I think the time I spent thinning down the edges of the various parts of the undercarriage doors was well spent. They do look better for it. The wheels are keyed to the legs, so the flat spot that's moulded in should align with the ground, but there is a little bit of wiggle room to move just a touch if needs be, and actually the flat spot that's moulded in isn't all that flat. A bit like newer Airfix kits, it's very nice that they mould the wheels with this flat spot and slight bulged effect, but it would be really nice if they moulded it actually flat so that when it's on resting on a surface it looks like it's resting on a surface, which is the whole point after all said and done. So that's the underside. I did add a little bit of staining here and there with the grime mix, the black brown spray. This is XF64 and black, about 50-50. Did add a little bit around here, not too much. Looking at photos, albeit mostly of warbirds, but they do give a good idea. Exhaust smoke doesn't really, I mean, you look at the geometry of the exhaust, it's going to eject it away a little bit, and it doesn't really seem to feature. Muck, yes, definitely. So I've just added a little bit just to sort of darken everything down, a little bit more off the back of the wheels and a little bit off the back of the guns as well. Just adds a bit of visual terrain there. And then flipping over carefully, obviously added the main canopy section, the sliding canopy section there. That is held into place with 6 tiny specks of super glue along the rails. And yes, you can use super glue on transparencies, just go steady with it and probably don't use accelerator if I were you. Still looks a bit goofy, but it does kind of fit now at least. Main aerial up there, the 3D printed ring and bead arrangement on the forward cowls here. Propeller's just pushed in, it's quite a tight fit, so that's all good. And you've got the 3D printed machine guns and the kit pitot probe down there. None of it caused any issues, everything was test fitted, and obviously when I re-drilled all the holes I made sure that everything fitted at that point. And then as a final thing, there's a little bit of detail painting. I've done the nav lights on the wingtips, upper and lower. The ones on the fin, which were just white lights or clear, I've just left as they were. That when I've trizacked it, it's taken the paint off the little moulded in blister, and I've just left it like that. So if you look closely and hard enough, you'll see that that is naked power grey plastic, but it'll do because it just differentiates it from the rest of the surface. And I don't think painting it silver honestly is really appropriate, especially in this small scale. Which reminds me, there's the underwing lamp, the AK chrome pen, and then the kit lens popped in there, and that was quite a tight fit, so that is just pushed in. And finally, when all is done, the actual aerials, which you probably can't see very well because of my black surface, we have a V going from wingtip to fin to wingtip, and then there's a supplementary lead coming down here. These are all done with super glue. I am going to try one of these days using Arma Ultra Glue to add things like this, but for this one I've used super glue as I normally do. And then the absolute last thing I do is I've used my little bit of matte VMS and a paintbrush and just gone around and tickled the edges of things where I've glued things in. Whether you use super glue, ultra glue, or even liquid cement, you'll quite often get a little bit of a shiny sort of edge where you've glued things in. It's quite difficult to fully avoid that, so I just use a little bit of that VMS on a paintbrush and just dot that around things just to dull down those glue patches so that they're less noticeable, and that is it done. Oh, propeller. There's the propeller. So we've got chipping on the leading edges of the blades and on the hub. So the instructions describe the hub as weathered, and where you might think the hub would be silver, and it probably is on a lot of aircraft, it appears it was black on in this case. So it was chipped, and then I brush painted those silver collars back in again, and then I've just brush painted a little bit of the Ammo acrylic gloss clear just on the hub area to differentiate it from the blades. Kit stencils, and that's the finished result. And I have to say, it's a delightful little model, and it is small, I'm sure you can tell. Get you back down on your feet. I think maybe the finish is perhaps a little less obviously weathered than I intended. It still looks quite vibrant, but I like it for it, because one of the things that drew me, or the main thing honestly that drew me to this in the first place, is this glorious camouflage scheme. So why sully it completely by making it look like... So the fact that it's not weathered to within an inch of its life is actually, I don't mind. It is a pretty little thing, it's a pretty little model, and I'm really quite happy with the finish. So overall then, as a kit, it's absolutely delightful, but I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. It looked really good on the inbox, and for the most part it delivered the promise that those parts showed. There is a bit of cleanup to be done. I expected that. Slightly heavier mould seams than you might see in a mainstream sort of injection moulded kit, but we don't have massive sink marks, we don't have massive ejector pins getting in the way of things. It's just a little bit of flash and a little bit of mould seam cleanup here and there. That's fine, I don't have an issue with that. I actually quite enjoyed doing it. But the big letdown is the canopy. The side windows are okay, but the windscreen and the main canopy were a lot of work. It caused a lot of work, and it still, to my eye, looks a little bit off. I think maybe I'm being hypercritical because of the issues I had at this point. So, you know, having to do a bit of filling and fettling around a clear part isn't something that I would necessarily mark a kit down for. The windscreen, I've got it to fit and it looks fine, but the fact of how much I had to put into getting this sliding portion to be even close to fitting isn't really on. It is possible that it was never designed to be fitted in the closed position. It's possible that the intent was for it to be built with the canopies open. And given the level of detail and excellence inside the cockpit, I wouldn't be surprised by that. However, the instructions do not detail that fact. Quite the opposite, they show it fitted in the closed position. So I'm really marking the whole kit down just because the canopy arrangement is a little bit lacking, and not everybody is going to want to do the sort of work I had to do there to get that to fit and to work out. And I did damage the canopy from some angles. You can see a bit of crazing up here from where the canopy was handled so much and it got flexed, and it has caused a little bit of internal crazing to the part, and I can't fix that. With all of that said though, from normal viewing distances it does looks pretty much fine, and the rest of the kit is lovely. There's enough detail everywhere. It's very, very nice. Without a doubt there could be more detail, yes, but with every kit there's a balance to be had, I believe, and at the price of £21 for such a small model, it's already pushing what most people are going to want to pay for a kit like this. So probably the addition of more detail would be detrimental to sales, I suspect. Overall though, I did enjoy the build. I really like the finished model. It does look very, very nice. I'm very happy with it. I'm happy that I did it. Happy to have another Frenchie in the collection. And I think Arma Hobby generally are going the right way with this. So we'll see what their P51 holds when it is released shortly. So that's it from this two-parter then. I did enjoy the build and I hope you enjoyed following along with me. Thank you very, very much for watching, and extra thanks as always to all of my channel members and to the people who are supporting me on buymeacoffee.com. I do appreciate it very, very much. And with all of that said, I think it only remains for me to say until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.